will be back in just a moment. If you could please go ahead and take your seat. We'll be starting back up.
Also, I have a question for you in terms of technology within Johns Hopkins. Monica, she's got a really interesting idea for education. I know you and your team are focused on engineering for this medical device, but in terms of networking, could you connect her with some engineers in your facility?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Everybody targets probably.
Maybe we can
Everybody's targeted.
Yeah, afterwards. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Putting people together and
happy to.
Yeah, we're going to be just one more minute. In early November or late
let's get, let me get back into lunch. Once I get into lunch, I want Dr. Bhatti on that, Bhagiraji on that, Mataji. Sorry, because we need to just make a decision. Have to make a decision.
Thank you very much.
So once we do this, then UL team will go to India.
So one of the wonderful things
we are back and forth to
India.
India.
It's one of the only places
many
that
times,
has this concept of
I think we're going to be there.
I mean, everybody's just postponed. India is the only place that's pre-planned.
And prepone is not a word, by the way. It's not a word.
Their meeting, with the minister has been preponed to yesterday. So it's very certain. Time is very certain. Can postpone.
It happened yesterday. You just were.
That's happened many times. I'm sorry, Dr. Collins. Your meeting was preponed. Right.
That's not a word.
It is only in, I've been in lots of countries, and that's the only place that I get.
Prepone is a word.
Those are in a show, by the way. Oh, thank you.
It's not a kind, I don't know any other place has that circular view of time.
Buzz.
Yeah.
We were looking to do something in one of their schools or with the Argus areas. Let's see how it goes.
tea, whatever you need. Okay, we can start from here. Okay, welcome back. Okay, thank you for coming back from the break and being on time. That's fabulous. We are going to get our afternoon started here by having a conversation about smart villages, and then we're going to change gears a little bit and open it up into a little bit more of a forum through another facilitator. So stay tuned for this. What I'd like to do next is tell you a quick bit about Earthopia, which some of you know about, some of you don't know about. Several years ago, 3 of us in this room got together and started this organization. That was Aaron Hines, Sunil Lisharze, and myself, started an organization called Earthopia with a question, really, an inquiry to make in the world of what would the planet be like if every child had access to a world-class education and an abundance of real food. And that inquiry has led us into a partnership with an ECHL and a team of amazing people that we've been fortunate enough to work with for years. And we're constantly asking the question of how can we help bring people together? How can we close gaps that exist that maybe others aren't filling, to be supportive and to bring love and compassion where maybe people have just ignored that particular area. And what I'm really excited about is that the gentleman I'm about to introduce to you is one of the most intelligent engineers I've ever met in my life. I mean, this guy, the first time I met, I think we had a conversation that lasted till 4 or 5 in the morning. I consider him one of my close friends and advisors. And if I had a 4 horsemen, like my personal group of men, he's definitely on that list. So please put your hands together to be talking about a digital India and smart villages. My dear friend, Aaron Hines.
Hi, everyone. So I'm about to show you some technology that, as with many good technologies, doesn't quite work yet. But nonetheless, I'm excited about it, and I'll explain that in part 2. A little bit about myself. I'm actually one of the, you could say, developers of the internet. So this is me at the end of my internet career when I was the president of IPDR, which became a standard that's now in every cable modem in the country. So it's part of DOCSIS. And I turned away from technology and started getting interested, if you want to move to the next slide.
Aaron, you've got your own.
And following in my, oh, I have a clicker. Okay, great. Someone's going to have to teach me this technology. Following in my parents' footsteps, they were actually in the Peace Corps in India. So I ended up in Nicaragua and took a real interest in villages, village life, and particularly sort of sustainability as applicable to villages. So this is me as I started to explore the eco-village movement. where I saw a lot of examples of pretty cool, innovative technologies that were on an appropriate scale. Like the whole planet could probably live in a school bus more likely than in a modern house, as most of us are living in. So I want to talk about blended technology, and specifically appropriate technology, digital education in villages, and sort of bring you up to date to where I've been over the last 3 or 4 years of exploring this. So here, for example, is my 2 years ago visit to India, where I was trialing, have you guys heard of one laptop per child? So that was a big program about 5 or 6 years ago. It kind of resolved itself into these little tablets here called the EXO tablet, which is available in Spanish and English, not Hindi. But nonetheless, I wanted to see how far I could get with the thing. It's not even available in India. I had to actually bring these with me on the plane from America. So although this tablet was designed for village kids, never mind about Indian village kids. It was apparently only for Latino village kids. And I tried it out, and it had all kinds of problems. So I want to show you, among other things, this really cool device, which is probably the best educational device that I have found in my 2 years of looking for a great educational device. And if we can actually turn the lights off, I think they're over there. I'm going to turn this thing on and do a quick educational video.
Oh, wow.
Aaron, why don't you put it in the wall to the left of the TV?
All right. So this is able to run off of a USB stick or an SD card. By the way, I'm bringing together a unique blend of technology here, so I would appreciate it if you guys don't go blabbing about my exact combination of solutions at this point in the technology development cycle.
Too late, I just tweeted it.
So here's something that might be appropriate in the village. Probably not going to mean a lot to half the people in the room. There is a volume button on here somewhere, but I've forgotten where it is. So sorry about the shaky video here. I'm assuming the content of this video is not actually the most important thing. The most important thing is probably that, like I said, I can get digital content from the internet onto this device. I don't know how to get back control of this thing. Oh, here we go. Onto this device, which is relatively village tolerant. All right, turn off. If we can have the lights back. So this one here, actually, I think is a much better bet for doing education and digital entrepreneurism in villages than any of these tablets. Partly because, as we've learned through the ECOL network, villages have a sense of community, and the collaborative activity of education, there's sort of a culture that allows you to learn together, as opposed to kind of the one-to-one model where you give every kid their own little thing and they like plug into it. And secondly, because the survivability of stuff in a village is pretty poor. Basically, any kind of high technology is likely to fail very quickly. So keeping a fleet of 30 little tablets alive is not going to happen in most villages, I'll just be honest. And even this thing here itself probably has a half-life of like 3 years. I mean, this is really robust. I'll pass it around. It's a pretty well-designed piece of equipment, but nonetheless, there's a lot of dust, water, and other things that are likely to kill it. At best, it's going to make it 5 years, and the battery will fizzle out. So let's move on to some of the other additions that I think still are going to come together probably the next time I do this talk in a year or two. I'm the clicker, sorry. All right. So I wanted to take a quick backwards retrospective. Does anyone have any idea what this might be?
Patent image.
That is some really awesome educational technology there, as patented by Maria Montessori, who also learned a heck of a lot from her 7 years in India, and probably at least half of her innovations, in my humble opinion, are just repackaging of standard Indian practices for education that pre-exist her by 2,000 years. She just happened to be the first European to go there and take credit for them. So I also want to honor one of the great innovators who was my own inspiration. So I grew up, I was a 12-year-old or maybe 11-year-old when I got that thing. And I basically like opened up the box and learned everything from then on using computers and books. Like I didn't need any adults to teach me. So I'm very confident with that thing that you guys are passing around. If I can get the right content on there, village kids can learn almost anything from that. So the question is like, where do we end up in the adoption cycle? I mean, you guys all know about technology adoption, right? So at this point, we're at the like early innovation stage on this particular platform of how to bring digital education into a village. So I want to talk about the nature of villages and the nature of cities for a minute, because this is really about the digital village, the smart village. This, believe it or not, was an incredibly powerful technology when it was developed. In fact, this was a prevalent technology for 5,000 years. Starting about 5,000 years ago until 500 years ago, the walled city was the superior form of organization for a civilization. In fact, the very word civilization basically goes back to the root of people who live in a city, which means having a wall around it, which also, unfortunately, means inherently requiring the importation of resources. So this is not sustainable technology. This is inherently, basically requires these people to have an armed force that goes out and takes other people's stuff. Thereby, the village has not done so well in the last 5,000 years. This is an example of a village in Darfur. And this process has been repeated again and again around the world in every culture over the last 5,000 years, to the point that the population, and by the way, people generally in the history of villages don't just up and leave and go to cities because cities are a better place to live. Who would want to live in this little festering swamp of diseases and all sorts of other nasty people that you don't really want to live that close to? No one would voluntarily live there until this happens to them, and then the city starts to look a lot better. So the city was a superior technology until about 500 years ago, around the time of the US, when we started to have things like Philadelphia. It was, Washington, D.C., for example, as designed by LaFont and some great thinkers of that time. So we didn't need a wall anymore, and pretty soon, starting in circa 1940, we ended up with this thing. Yeah, exactly. I actually live in Greenbelt, so this is like near and dear to my heart. But this was the first suburb, basically, the first designed suburb. At the time, it was designed in an era of socialism when people could live close and be friendly, and before the automobile was rampant. So what actually happened was, by the end of World War II, we didn't want anything to do with socialism. Everyone got a car, and instead of having like this little village, like a village center, instead we have suburbs where people don't talk to each other and they live entirely off their television. So is that the superior technology for civilization for the rest of the time? I actually hold out to you that this may be the next stage of civilization. That returning to living in villages that are not at danger of incineration by invading forces, that are augmented by the latest digital technology, which is sustainable. And I'll show some examples of that here, if you guys want to pass some of these around and make a guess as to what that is. I was going to show them a little video on that thing, but anyway. So I'm going to show one other video. Do you mind hitting the play button? Because I don't know how to get it to actually play itself. Laptop guy.
Bob.
What do you want? Sorry. Can you play the video?
How do you play it?
Play the video.
I need sound.
They need time to incubate, and they spend a lot of time in this partial hunch form.
Ideas.
The other thing that's important when you think about ideas this way is that when ideas take form in this hunch state, they need to collide with other hunches. Oftentimes, the thing that turns a hunch into a real breakthrough is another hunch that's lurking in somebody else's mind. And you have to figure out a way to create systems that allow those hunches to come together.
We've got the Pandora station playing in the background.
Technology.
We're a little musical assistance.
Back to this is where technology. Battery?
You have to sing these, you have to sing along.
Okay.
He's capable of that.
For a moment there, I was thinking, hey, good choice of background music.
Me too.
Very Earthopia. So, yeah.
Let's try it again.
That is, more often than not, how ideas happen. They need time to incubate, and they spend a lot of time in this partial hunch form. The other thing that's important when you think about ideas this way is that when ideas take form in this hunch state, they need to collide with other hunches. Oftentimes, the thing that turns a hunch into a real breakthrough is another hunch that's lurking in somebody else's mind. And you have to figure out a way to create systems that allow those hunches to come together and turn into something bigger than the sum of their parts.
So this is potentially one of the killer pieces of technology, because what we have here is an animation that can be easily dubbed in any language that is elaborating on a fairly abstract concept, which is like, how does innovation happen? So I can pretty easily explain a high-level, college-level concept using a really great drawing tool. So this is an example of like how I'm going to be working with some of the best designers in Indian education. In fact, the very woman who designed a lot of the ACL educational paradigm 35 years ago. I'm directly working with her to blend these two technologies together. So my hunch, her hunch, that's where we're at right now. And I want to give a specific example of innovation at this level. So this, when I lived in Nicaragua, was the innovator in the village. Here he is doing a trick with his baby kid, much to the impression of everyone else, as you can see. And it was amazing because the level of trust and communication between this infant and this inventor who understands gravity and is teaching his daughter gravity, basically. Teaching her balance at an early age when kids don't have that kind of balance typically. So this was with no tools available, that was what he was in. I mean, in a village, there's not a lot to work with, but still innovation happens. This is a friend of mine who actually started a number of eco-village communities. He has the greatest seed collection of things you can eat in Virginia that don't require pesticides. His name is Alexis Ziegler. He's the author of several books about culture change and sustainability. And here's a specific piece of technology that he has demonstrated to me, which is also what you guys are passing around.
Okay.
I ordered these on eBay, but the Postal Service has not been cooperative, so they're lost in Postal Service land. But I actually have on the way this very set of batteries. Now, what is that, and why is it better than the battery that is in your cell phone or in your car? By the way, do you guys know what happens to car batteries? You don't even want to know. And what's in car batteries? You don't even want to know. Acid and lead, two of the most toxic things. What happens to them afterwards? They leave the country and go to someone else's country where they take care of them. So there's a huge amount of everyday technology, including probably, unfortunately, everything you're carrying around with you, that is not like this piece of technology. This technology is a battery that will last for 100 years, and you can drink out of it. It is literally, utterly non-toxic battery. Those three of these things here are sufficient to run my entire little classroom, power my entire little classroom environment after being charged by a solar panel. What's the problem with it? Why does no one use it? It's too heavy, it's too big. These days you can get more power out of your cell phone battery than out of this big old thing. So we would rather be all carrying around our own personalized toxic device instead of having some things that, now if you guys know anything about disposal systems in a village, the standard practice for disposing things is burning it. That is literally the truth. So I do not want to be responsible for bringing an educational device into a village that is going to end up getting burned in that village with a ton of toxins. So I'm actually, like our great design thinker there, trying to put together an environmentally sustainable, culturally appropriate package for bringing digital education that is native to the village. It includes technologies that are appropriate for the village.
What is that battery? Can you tell us? You got us all appetite. What is that battery? What's that magic battery? What's in it?
Oh, this is a nickel iron battery. So it has a nickel plate, an iron plate, and distilled water, basically. Lasts for 100 years. You change the water every 10 years. It's totally non-toxic. It was invented by Thomas Edison, and so I'm actually buying an original Edison battery, and I'm going to do my demo. Next time you see me, it's going to be running off a 100-year-old battery. I kid you not. So anyway, that's where we're at. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks.
And if you want to charge your cell phone very slowly afterwards, they're going to be
Oh, okay, cool.
Excellent. So great teaser trailer for more to come, right? What's in the incubator phase. We're going to switch gears now to our next speaker, who unfortunately has to leave us a little bit early, so we're going to move him ahead. And he's, gosh, he's got a long resume. Let's just say
Just skip the resume.
Okay, I'll skip the
easier.
resume. So
Yeah, it's
let's
faster
just
to
do
jump
so
in.
this is now an opportunity to actually have a facilitated conversation about what's possible in what we've been having conversations with so far. So without further ado, please give a huge round of applause for Dr. Ahmed Kalva. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just speak from here, and that'll save us some setup time as well. So I've had a number of roles. I'm a U.S. Health officer for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The roles have varied from being the chief medical officer for health IT and quality at HRSA, which is one of the agencies inside HHS. So if I say biomedical research, people's heads should immediately pop up NIH in their heads, right? As a little thought bubble. One of the agencies within HHS. If I say biosurveillance or epidemiology, people's heads probably should go to CDC, right? HRSA is, if I say, the single largest complicated agency on delivery of healthcare, actual footprint of healthcare globally. Very few people's heads go to HRSA, but that's where it should go, and I'll explain a bit why in a second. What I want to do is combine some of the previous discussions with a simultaneous discussion for a second for disclosure. I'm actually using my Stanford hat and my people-centered internet hat in what I'm going to say, combined together through a complicated relationship to the Thought Leadership and Innovation Foundation, which is actually officially where I am here today. So I'm not going to speak HHS policy per se, but I have access to people who can do that, okay? I have, let's put this in context. Who knows who the first node, the person sending the little signal that went to the second node of what became the internet? Like the two key people. Who was the node 1 and who was node 2 functionally? I'll skip real quickly to the answer. Vint Cerf, Doug Engelbart, okay? It was basically Southern California, UCLA kind of territory. Vint had grown up in Van Nuys, went to Stanford and then went to graduate school actually in the LA area, and sent the first little thing that actually made it across space of what became the internet, okay? If we fast forward, you have ARPANET and some other complicated competitions between different models, i.e. different ideas, different nudges, different hunches, as you put it, that had to deal with some requirements that had to be in a competition. And that competition, for all intents and purposes, was the Department of Defense saying, can we come up with a solution that would survive a bombing of Kansas City or something to that effect, such that you could get a message starting from San Francisco and get to Washington, D.C. or New York City. And in fact, what happens in TCP/IP, which is the transfer control protocol that Vint and another guy came up with, basically what the message does is it separates into little packets, and they self-choose which node to go through. So if one gets bombed in the middle of the country or in another part of the country, the packet will just go in a different direction because it's a network. And so they reconstitute themselves when all of them arrive on the destination point, and then you have the message actually delivered, okay? You understand the concept? You need a network. And it's a network that became bomb-proof because, and that's what met the DoD's request, and that's why we have the internet the way it currently is configured conceptually. There's some interesting sociology that is implied, and I'll circle back on that from a global point of view, but hold that thought for a second. So let me backfill one piece. So Vint and a lot of the technology people and a whole lot of other aspects of it were really focused on the evolution of the software, the IT and the hardware stuff. Okay, Doug Engelbart had a very different concept in terms of relevance. By the way, Doug is the inventor of the mouse. He's the inventor of a bunch of other things. Has anybody heard of the mother of all demos? Look that up. 1968, okay? People who brought over from MIT and other places absolutely swore this was a hoax, that it could not have happened. It was the first time that in public the mouse was shown, but so were things like live editing that was showing up on the screen board at the same time the conversation was taking place. And in other words, word processing and a number of other things that simply had not been seen in public, but was in existence at SRI. And so what happened, by the way, that's a quirk. For a long time, about 80% of all internet traffic was going up and down the axis between Southern California and Northern California. There was a reason for that, which is part of this history. But Engelbart is the key I want to get to. Engelbart basically conceived of the need not just to have an evolution of the software and technology, but a co-evolution of the human systems, the adaptation of systems to figure out how to actually use these new set of tools and gadgets and stuff. In other words, if you buy a really expensive, TiVo, let's say, because you saw it in the family across the street or something like that, and you buy the gadget, but you don't learn to use certain functions. In other words, you just come in and turn it on when you walk in the house, you watch TV through it, but you don't realize you can record stuff and play it that you would otherwise would have missed, then you're missing the point of what the TiVo might be useful for at your household. And then you just have an expensive decoration for your house, right, to waste and squander. Engelbart's idea is that you needed to co-evolve the human systems so that the IT could be used. What he ran was what's called the AI lab at SRI. That was not artificial intelligence. It was the augmented intelligence lab. And that thing was supposed to help you figure out how to work in the group process those additional insights that could come from the technology side of the picture. In our modern sense, the big data, the analytics, the crunching of all this sort of stuff, as well as the interoperability of all of these different gadgets that are beginning to actually communicate with each other. The beauty of what you've been talking about, the beauty of what you shared, is that you're really working on a more complicated issue, which is not how to evolve the gadget, but how to evolve the human systems to deal with and take it to another level, right? In other words, how do you get the group process to happen so that you get a sociological and cultural effect? It's actually a more difficult problem than inventing a little thing and then selling it, because it factors in humans, and that is hard to do. If we stop for a second and think about what the internet is doing right now, your city-state from 5,000 years ago at some point became less and less relevant to a governance reality than it was in the past, because you had feudal times, for example, in which they had kings and queens and all the lords and all got a control system for the humans to deal with the repercussions of that organization, of that invention of the city-state. But the implication is that there may be a relative obsolescence of even the nation going forward if we start thinking about the planet and the need of the humans in the whole planet. And there is, I would tender that there is, for example, have you heard of eGov as a concept? I have a problem with eGov as a concept because I think a lot of people think of eGov as just an electronic, faster version of traditional government functions, when in reality, a much more useful construct might be e-public service. The notion that people might be willing to volunteer data or gather data. We use healthcare, for example. There's a thing, for example, in Silicon Valley and a number of other areas. Patients Like Me. Have you heard of that at all? So Patients Like Me is a group of people who are sharing data on themselves with regards to healthcare without asking permission of the NIH, without asking permission of any of the traditional academic institutions around who can do research and who knows how to do randomized controlled trials and blah, 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 right? The answer is, however, things are coming up, they're bubbling up in solutions and innovations that are quite different than traditional control systems that have certain self-interest, if you think about it, to be in control. The same thing is happening, or can happen in many ways, with e-public service, with data around water around sanitation, a lot of other data points that people could in fact collaborate on with the right gadgets and all that sort of connectivity. Which might mean that certain governmental functions become obsolete if the community takes it on themselves. And part of the real insight I think that ECOL, you guys, Arogia together, etc., are doing is you're running something that you own. You own in the community of participants. You did not need to ask the permission of any government to actually do this, which means you own it. And this is a really critical piece that I want to make sure you understand. If you run a pilot, if you run a demonstration that is funded by the US government, whether as a contract or whether as a grant or a cooperative agreement, it actually becomes owned by the US government officially, right? Because you deliver the product to the thing. If you started this thing up in the community of solution that you are in fact owning yourselves, it's owned by the community of participants. And the really quirky thing is, as a Fed, I am allowed to help a community of solution go from point A to point B, over, you know, let's do the reverse thinking, from point A to B over time, right? Yeah, it could be quality, it could be some other thing. As long as I'm actually helping a community or a community of participants, that's totally allowed, and it could still remain owned by the community. If it's a traditional contract or award, it's then owned by the government. So what you guys are really doing is much more complicated than I think sometimes is understood to be. And you're doing it with good heart in rural India, but it has all kinds of other implications, and this is what I want you to process for a second. We have run very complicated, actually run the largest quality improvement systems effort in the nation with a group of entities that some of you may not know called the Federally Qualified Health Service. People know what an FQHC is in this at all? No, most people don't know. FQHCs, I've got 10,000 sites in this country, every U.S. state and territory that reports to me. I've got 24 million patients in this country right now, which is actually the single largest primary care network right now in this nation. But it's functioning as a network because of all the need to have the collaboration of the local community perspective factored in with this technology side of the picture. So we were able to evolve this by being clear that the more difficult problem was dealing with people, not dealing with the technology only, right? What I'd like to suggest is that in these conversations today, dare to not think of it as just an issue relative to a gadget, but your community of practice. The question becomes, what do you want to do with that? Okay? Yes?
I just want to re-emphasize what you're saying, because we have so much interest in the technology piece and we neglect the social human piece, which is the fundamental structures that we work with and for.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have a chance to stay for the presentation that I'm going to be talking about, but it's all about personal empowerment and human agency. And what are the tools that we have now that are available, very easy to implement, that help individuals that otherwise wouldn't be thinking about, oh, they're bettering themselves, or have, suffered from generations of learned helplessness, to get out of that, to be more willing to take on a new technology, or to, get more health seeking or those kinds of things. So there's not enough people doing that.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, so I'll talk to you about the work we have been doing that has resulted in really amazing shifts in some of the most disenfranchised populations. But we also need more partners to
Sure.
think.
I think we all do, and that's part of this colliding of these ideas, and really nice job in combining a lot of different points of view. The real bottom line is you've got that youngster that can learn at the local village, if exposed to stuff, empowered as an individual, as a little guy. But in fact, you're simultaneously empowering the education process. And what happens with that is you've got the people in India, in rural environments, that are, the more people are going to want to hook up with you. coming up with. That's the one thing I want to give you a heads up about, a warning. Because everybody's going to want to do and try their little gadget on your network, okay?
And that's happening.
Or you're going to see it. It's going to happen. And the question really becomes, is that what you want to do? And you're going to have to think that through very strategically, not just short-term tactical stuff. What that means, I'm not yet sure of. But I just want you to be conscious of that, because the wisdom is going to be from the idea that, nothing about us without us, which is to say, community-oriented approach to co-developing of that future, i.e. actual discussions with people in the community in India, as opposed to a traditional kind of study on that group, or even with good intent. Okay, so I want to open it up and make sure that if I didn't get across, if I'm confusing you, then maybe there's a chance to help message correctly. But I think you guys have a very complex problem that is becoming even more complicated, given the fast change of the technology, and a lot of strange politics that are likely to play in. Questions? One last thing from my end. The demonstration from ARC was a proof of concept. The fact that it's validated, your work is wonderful to see. There is resources, as you actually well said earlier, that USAID and a bunch of other agencies can actually do and help you with a lot less strings attached than you would think. Because you're in a very unusual juncture in that the ability to attach a gadget to the back-end software and all the analytics to a human being is real now. Mm-hmm. You guys have access to the human beings of the communities that really need that. Don't forget that. That's your biggest strength. And that's why I talk about the people-centered internet. I do not talk about the Internet of Things. I'm not interested in the Internet of Things, because that's just a business approach to, in fact, making more money for some group who happen to invest in that particular gadget early on, right? And connecting more things to things, then we go down the, artificial intelligence angle only, when in reality, the group dynamics of peopleness, this conversation, your conversations with other similar chapters, where you have a human being or a family or a community at heart, or the planet, because frankly, from a global health disease point of view, you've got infectious disease risks and emergent diseases from all kinds. We're all in this together, folks. And so just don't forget your people. All the gadgets will start, and companies will start coming to you a lot faster than you may have realized. I just think that's going to happen.
Yeah, fantastic.
We do have a couple of minutes for any questions.
What do you recommend for grants?
Well, yeah, so legally I'm precluded from giving you specific recommendations about the Office of the Advancement of Telehealth, which happens to sit in my shop, however, just so you know. And so we reach, not just this country, but globally. Most people think DOD does a lot of telehealth in the VA, but it's actually HRSA. If you know what PEPFAR is, the President's Global Health Initiative, the State Department is the front face of that, but the analytics is all my shop inside HRSA, because we also run the HIV/AIDS Bureau for this country, and in the Ryan White funding for all of that. The Bureau of Primary Health Care is what holds all the community health centers and the FQHCs, Maternal Child Health Bureau, and a bunch of others that are, HRSA is the ultimate of a bureaucracy. It's got bureaus instead of institutes. But the real bottom line is there is real interest in USAID, and USAID in partnership with other departments and other entities is the perfect place to go for money now, because they're looking for collaboration and collaborative projects. And what you guys are doing, you're the embodiment of collaboration, and especially as other companies come to deal with you, I think there's going to be additional resources. Obviously, there's also philanthropic monies all over, but the tricky part is navigating there so that you can find somebody that's actually got their heart set on a similar topic, and that's a question of the heart rather than the analysis. And I think that's a little bit more of a gamble. In other words, you have to find a philanthropist who wants to actually fund a particular angle on something. So I think that's a little harder, personally. Okay, but we can circle back on other parts of the U.S. government, because it turns out legally I don't have a problem with helping you get a grant from elsewhere, but I just can't do it from side. Then I'm clear. The lawyers went through all of it. So anyway, I'll stop.
Actually, I have a quick question for you. Is there any work going on in your organization right now that addresses emotional intelligence and the impact of emotional intelligence on the physical well-being of people?
Yeah, there's a lot of dialogue and work going on from the NIH side of the picture. It's couched under the Center for Minority Health. The definition of minority health is evolving so that it's opening up exactly these kinds of opportunities. That's another piece that's happening. In other words, the traditional definition of one institute is blending more. Turns out, for example, that you have the people who study psychiatric or neurological diseases or hypertension and cardiovascular diseases. When those systems were developed conceptually, they didn't really anticipate things like dysautonomias, which are diseases that are problematic for blood pressure control but are neurologically or neuroendocrinally controlled, and so which get triggered off by anxiety and stress and problems. So in other words, the cardiologist does not have all the answers when it comes to cardiovascular diseases, because in fact there's some weird syndromes that are triggered by anxiety, right? And actually drop the blood pressure, people faint, or you get things like POTS syndrome, and weird syndromes. The point is, ultimately, there's more action, I think, going on going forward in the collaboration even between research fields, and there is some real opportunities for these kinds of community aspects. And not just even HHS, more interestingly in education and other departments. DoD actually has some interest in all of this, just like it did relative to the whole notion of what became the internet. In other words, that has a lot to do with global health.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Calvin. Thank you. And I'm going to make sure that we get our next presentation up first. And I think, did we copy your presentation on our drive? I think we did. What was it? What's Colin called? He's going to pull it up on the screen here. You want to look up there? And just make sure you...
Oh, yeah. Oh, you want me to go next? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to.
Okay, so when you've got your slide.
Oh, that's great.
Clicker right here. Okay, our next presenter is a medical anthropologist. She's here at Johns Hopkins, and we won't discriminate against you.
That's fine.
And she's doing some interesting work as far as enhancing women's effectiveness through personal empowerment training. Please put your hands together for Dr. Anita Chika.
I'm going to talk a little bit about agency-based empowerment, but I realize I'm going to need to give you some definitions about what I mean. This is, let's see, this? No?
It's the
I can try it for you.
Okay, so what is agency first? So agency is a component of empowerment, but there's so many different definitions of empowerment. And any program that comes in, people always feel like, oh yes, they've gotten empowered, they're so excited, etc. But there's some important distinctions that are needed in order for you to really understand the kind of the value of empowerment.
Oh, no,
Okay.
Can you plug that thing back in?
That's right.
Yes. Perfect.
The most commonly use of empowerment or an aspect of empowerment is resource-based empowerment. So there's skills, opportunity, education, money. This is what most of the programs have been designed to do as they empower individuals. Agency, however, is that aspect of empowerment that's related to the capacity to act. So it's related to health, self-efficacy, intrinsic motivation, self-respect, self-reliance, etc. So what we need to do as we're thinking about empowerment is to figure out how we can enhance that second piece of empowerment, agency, and that's the capacity to make decisions about one's own life and act on them to achieve a desired outcome, free of violence and retribution of fear. And this is through the World Bank, but in general, it's about making your own decisions based on what it is that you want. So why do we choose to focus on agency? Well, a lot of people, when they see people in a community, they're like, oh, well, this person is very active and they're able to innovate and think very creatively. And what we don't realize is that capacity is actually nurturable. We can nurture agency in individuals. So what facilitates agency? Well, mostly what we've heard about is exposure to new knowledge, exposure to new opportunities. And so on one side, you have this kind of the new knowledge, the new technology, the new gadgets and everything, financial access. And then you have action. But we're not empty vessels as human beings. We have, oh, whoops. Oh, shoot. Anyway, we have what happens in the brain. You get all this information that's thrown out at you, and then it has to go into our mental framework about what we know, how we feel, what we've done in the past, what we want to do in the future. And those are the things that will determine if a person takes any action or not. And the problem with a lot of the empowerment programs that we've seen is that they focus on this external input without understanding the basis of the individuals and how they think, feel, or do in their local context, what their history has been, what their belief systems are, what they want for the future. And oftentimes, more than not, that prevents people from taking that knowledge and making some action. And this is particularly true for women who have been, generation after generation, thousands of years, been disenfranchised and disempowered. So the goal of the work that we've been doing is to try to see if we can understand what's happening for individuals in this process and see if there's a way that we can facilitate their own self-reflection, their own self-awareness to improve their likelihood of action. So we've been developing this agency-based empowerment training that has several key components. One, it has to be meaningful for the individual. If I come to your door and talk to you about diabetes and nobody has diabetes in your family, you're not going to be interested in it. So we want it to be meaningful for those individuals. They have to be thinking about what it is that they can do, that they have the power from where they stand. We're not suggesting that they take on a new behavior. So really the locus of control needs to be for them. We talk to them about very, very simple psychological and behavioral tools like cognitive reframing. So how do you think now? Where is it that you want to go? How can you change how you think now to move you closer to where it is you want to go? And it's a process for reflection and review. And this simple idea of just taking time, especially for women, to think about their lives for themselves is never done, for the most part, in any of these villages that we've worked. And we have worked in the most disenfranchised, most challenged circumstances and settings. So this is actually a workshop. It's just a training workshop where we get individuals together. We need them to be in the group because, as many people have mentioned, we're not alone. We need our social network. So we come together as a group, usually 15 to 20 women together, or individuals, so that as they're building their own individual agency, it's kind of supported by the collective agency of the group. The exercises are based on standard psychological methods from positive psychology, psychoanalysis, and mindfulness. And each of the exercises are culturally adapted to the local context and crafted to reflect the existing social norms and values by someone who has been trained very well in this process. Okay, so it's not like we're saying, oh, here, let's give you an example from southwestern Ohio, in a slum area in Kenya. So it's very, very important that it has meaning and people can understand what they're talking about. And I can go through some of the exercises that we go through just so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. As I mentioned, small groups. They're doing an introspection of their own lives, but also within that context of the group. There's a lot of experiential learning techniques. They look at their core beliefs. You know, what is important to them? How do they think? You know, what their values are, and what's kind of driving them. And then they start envisioning their own goals. But as they are thinking about this, they start to identify those beliefs that may be limiting them that they may never have thought about. So anytime we are brought to, you know, a new technology, the first thing we may be thinking is, well, I don't know how to use technology, I'm not smart enough, I don't have education, etc. So they look at their limiting beliefs and see if they can turn those limiting beliefs around so that they can use it. There's several different examples and different pilots that we've done, but I want to talk specifically about the work that we've done with women in sex work in Pune in India. So these are individuals who had been sold into sex work at a very young age, 13, 14, very, very poor areas and rural areas throughout India, Nepal, Bangladesh, etc. And so we did this workshop, lasted about 3 or 4 days, and where they were able to look at their lives, kind of identify those pains that had been, the trauma that they had gone through, thought about what it is that they wanted, and to start making a plan for their future. So it's just a 3 or 4 day exercise, and then we followed them. We followed about 60 women who had gone through this process over the course of the year. So what we found was that not only were there, here, I'll move on to this, not only were there increased in their relationships with other people, but half of this population are HIV positive. So we had substantial increases in adherence to antiretrovirals. If they hadn't been tested for HIV, they were getting tested. They were also getting tested for TB and diabetes on their own. They had a weekly gynecologist that would come. The attendance to those sessions more than tripled. 80% started savings accounts, but the thing that we didn't expect, that over the course of the year, not only did they make all these changes, but they were able to save enough money in their savings accounts so that 25% of these women successfully paid off their debt, and they left sex work on their own. Wow. They were not rescued. And they developed their own skills in entrepreneurship, but that was self-directed. They knew what they wanted to do, and it was like opening this box of power for themselves to be able to take on the opportunities that were already there. And so that's the power of what you do. Here is just you give them the opportunity to think about what's important to them, and then link them up with existing opportunities for them to take on. We also did this within the context of a randomized controlled trial, not necessarily with communities of disenfranchised women, but to link it in with economic viability. So we were doing this work with clean energy entrepreneurs in Kenya. And it was done as a randomized controlled trial. And we trained there's both men and women. Half the people got trained in this agency-based empowerment training. Half of them got trained in the standard entrepreneurial training. How to keep books, how to manage money, how to get clients, etc. As a result, and then we followed them for about 8 months. As a result of the agency-based training, the people who went through that process more than doubled their sales, and they were nearly 3 times more likely to be higher sellers. And if you look at the kind of the business likelihood, you know, how long they survive. So everyone started the business here, and then many people dropped off very quickly. But if you were in the control group, by the end of that 8 months, about 20% of those businesses were still viable. However, if you got the agency-based training, more than 52%. And that's because it required additional grit and perseverance that they were able to get through this intrinsic motivation that was developed through this training. Okay, so as a result, through the clean energy sector, and this is kind of really talking about how do we support women entrepreneurs. But we have handbooks, and I won't go through this in too much detail because I'd like to get some questions. We created this program that was really using human-centered design principles and trying to look at entrepreneurial training from an agency-based perspective. So all the business aspects and the empowerment as well as the leadership components are designed to have people be given the new information and then process that information to see how they can best use it. So when I talk to you about, oh, we have to keep records, it's not just about the technical aspects about how to keep records. Is I want to ask you, so are there any beliefs or thoughts that are preventing you from actually writing this down? Do you have fear of your capacity to work with numbers? Are you afraid of X, Y, Z? And so identifying what's holding people back from a thought perspective can help them identify, oh, well, you know what? Get your son to come help you and maybe he can do this, or your daughter or whoever. So it's really understanding actions at a very micro level and being able to course correct, you know, from their own power. They're making the decisions. And so that's what I like so much about what you were saying as well. You know, innovation can be created from the bottom up. And you have to create the conditions to be able to help support that. So, yeah, and this is just some of the core competency, and you can see at the core is personal power, which is cognitive awareness, managing self, independence and self-confidence, and assertion and voice. So, anyway, thank you.
We do have a couple minutes if you have any questions for Dr. Shankar.
Yes.
Yeah, so the perspective it seemed that you developed, this was coming from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, a psychological standpoint, right?
It was not necessarily entrepreneurial. It was really all about kind of what goes on in people's heads. It actually came out of many, many years of talking to women about with health programs, trying to make them feed their kids green leafy vegetables and go to the healthcare center, and realizing all of our communication programs were just like getting stuck and and never moving beyond them. They heard it, they knew it, they couldn't act on it.
No, yeah, I get that. So I guess the reason I'm asking this question is because a lot of what you mentioned sounds a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, yeah, sure,
Right.
absolutely, and a lot of those concepts are put in here.
Right.
Go ahead, you ask your question. And
Yeah,
then I'll
no, I mean
ask.
that's I was mostly curious as to the approach because that sounded so much like from my understanding of cognitive behavioral therapy that I mean, especially when you mentioned that they started savings accounts, I said, well, that makes complete sense based on okay, so you're getting out of I think the term they have it is I forgot the term, but there's a term in cognitive behavioral thinking where it's like self-defeating thought processes.
Yep. It's all about limiting beliefs, exactly. And a lot of those, the basic exercises will come from cognitive behavioral therapies. One of the challenges has been is that tends to be looking at CBT tends to be used in populations where mental illness is considered the challenge. We have humans that don't necessarily have mental illness, but they are surrounded by really, challenging circumstances. And so, these are very, very simple exercises, and the only addition the couple of additions that we had, because of these populations in terms of the kind of generations of learned helplessness, is we've also drawn from psychoanalysis, like the letting go exercise, because there needs to be some process to address the existing traumas. And then other aspects coming from psychology, like mindfulness, have also those kinds of exercises have been really critical to help the self-reflection process. So yes, a big core part of it comes from cognitive behavioral therapies and reframing, but from a population perspective, not necessarily a clinical perspective.
Yeah.
And then draws from other areas of psychology.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put what you said into a box. Like I have my idea of this is what cognitive behavioral therapy is, and I have my idea. Okay, this is a lot of the other language you're using has to do with talking about empowerment, self-motivation. It's like the kind of stuff you would hear from like a motivational speaker, or no, I mean like or an entrepreneurial talk. So I'm just trying to like, is it like what?
So yes and yes,
Okay.
right?
All right. So how would you ask me to, like, if I were to describe, okay, this is this kind. So would you call it empowerment training, or what kind of? What?
So I would call it agency-based empowerment training because we're looking at kind of catalyzing human agency right? That capacity to act. So it's not just about whether you know it or not, whether you are driven to act. So my metric is whether you said you wanted to do it and whether you did it. Not whether you thought about it, not whether you had a plan about it. I want to know if you did it. And the piece, though, that's necessary is that cultural adaptation, because you have to be able to work through knowledge systems that are local that make sense. So whether it came, from Sigmund Freud or didn't, it doesn't, it's just how we think and kind of getting us so that we focus on what it is that we want and identifying the resources that we can get there. Yeah.
So have you done any of this with in rural settings with farmers?
Yeah. Very good question. And yes, well.
And what was the outcome?
So we have done it primarily with women, but I haven't done any studies necessarily with farmers. We have been doing some of this work in Maharashtra, in central Maharashtra, and some of the rural villages, really in context.
But weren't the women in Bolivia, weren't they farmers?
Oh, of course, yes. Okay, I was thinking India, yes, but we've also done it with Quechan women in the Andes in Bolivia. It was all around, also clean. They were involved in clean cooking activities, but it started shifting how people interacted with each other. And so that's why the kind of having the group to continue on is that once you go through this kind of opening up or enlightening process for that individual, the way they engaged with others became much better. So that if there was the management of anger for themselves and how they interacted with others, improved their relationships with their family members. So with respect to farmers, not in that case but that population could easily be engaged in this process. And we've done both men and women. Now we have actually seen that women respond to this process much better than men do. But we're kind of working with the men. For the women, we've seen dramatic changes for women who have been survivors of domestic violence, women, even issues where suicide has come up.
That's where I'm looking at, because of farmer suicides in India and Maharashtra, which is an excellent place to start.
Yeah.
This is an ideal way because, working in that loss of power that the farmers are feeling now and causing them to.
Right. So the interesting thing, just a couple of things to keep in mind as you are working in India. Now, again, and I don't mean to have any gender disrespect here, but as we've talked with women, it's like they see the application right away. How do we manage our money? How do you do this? A lot of the men that we've been talking with about start saying, oh, is this another, religious thing or, some kind of a guru? And it's like...
Well, that's the approach.
That's...
Because it depends on who it's coming from. That's exactly what, that's where ECO has its core, is because the approach they use, that is the biggest fear right now in the villages, is who's bringing the knowledge. And that fear factor, that who's brainwashing me or taking advantage of me. Exploitation. At the core of it is exploitation. Because so much exploitation has been gone on the farmer. The farmers are where they are because of exploitation.
Yes,
the seeds that they've been given that do not regerminate, the pesticides that they have to buy, the money that they have to borrow. All this is as a so all that exploitation is what's caused that fear.
Right.
So you're right, exactly. Who's coming in? Who's the next exploiter?
Right, and so that's why the people who are facilitating these have to be local. They have to understand those
conversations.
Can you
teach this to others?
Do you mind if we wrap up? We're going to have a chance to continue on.
Sure.
So clearly, great presentation. Thank you for answering that. Thank you. And Bob, you're going to be up next if you want to pull up your presentation, sir.
I don't have a presentation, I have a photograph.
We'll just
I
be
pulled
happy
this up. So first of all, as we're wrapping up
Hold on a
this
second, before you start,
session, I'd
'cause
like
you
to...
deserve a round of applause and
No.
an introduction.
No, I was going to say, welcome to Johns Hopkins. On behalf of the,
So, our next speaker is the founding director of the Center for Clinical Global Health Education. And he's been doing work in India for now nearly 4 decades. And so his work is expanded. He's only like 25 too, which is amazing. Right? He's been doing work for a long
prior
time.
life, current life,
So,
future life.
and the most qualified mouse clicker I've ever worked with in my life. A huge round of applause for Dr. Robert.
Well, again, welcome to Hopkins, and welcome especially to the to this Center for Clinical Global Health Education and the Division of Infectious Diseases, because that's where you are. So what I thought I would do, I'm not going to make a formal presentation. What I would like to do is, it was really interesting hearing all the discussion this morning, and I think what I'd like to do is say a few words about why my own motivation and interest in this subject, but more importantly, perhaps reinforce some of what I've heard already based on my own experience and lessons learned, and open it up for questions. So I was very fortunate 37 years ago to have an opportunity to start my public health and health career in India. And ironically enough, it was in rural Bihar and now parts of what are now Jharkhand. I worked in Dhanbad district and Chakradapur and Chaibasa and all through there doing leprosy work. And it was really that experience that started my entire career in this field of health and infectious diseases. And I had an opportunity over those years to help to initiate a whole range of both research and education programs with many, many great colleagues in India as well as here at Hopkins, including Dr. Shankar, who you just heard, who we've worked together for many, many years. And I think that one of the lessons learned is illustrated by this photograph and what I just said, and a lot of it's about the people, right? So it's about leadership, it's about the people you work with. That is an important component of any successful program, and I think certainly we heard the same story from ECHO. In the center there is Dr. Sebelius, who was the HHS health secretary. You can't see Roger Glass off to the side, but there are a lot of other dignitaries who came to visit us in Pune, where we were celebrating our 20th anniversary of this collaboration. And a lot of the folks there are members of our collaborative team, a lot of former Hopkins alumni trained here and now back working in India. And the point of this picture is really to reinforce what I think others have said, is that having the right people, the right empowered people is critical to any program. And figuring out how to create an environment where that can happen, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, probably one of the most important challenges for any successful program. I think that the other thing that I was going to mention is that I could talk for days about these subjects, but I just want to mention 2 things. I think all of us are motivated, whether we be